So, Jeet, my first question to you would be that according to you, how wide is the current gap of income inequality between the top and the bottommost society in India? Do you think the gap is increasing?
You know, the very first question that you're asking, we actually do not have, let me emphasize, we do not have income inequality data in India. Certainly not official. The NSSO, I was on the first national statistical under Tendulkar, 2006 to 2009. And at that time, I'd made a plea that we should have an income distribution survey. The NSSO should have an income distribution survey. And that fell on deaf ears within the government. And if you will, to this day, I still make the same demand. So that I think it's a very important question to look at. It's a very important parameter. You get a lot of information about society. And indeed, you get a lot of information for better policies if you have income distribution data. We don't. There is the only income distribution. There are a few non-government surveys, the most prominent of which is the IHDS, Integrated Household Survey by NCAR and University of Maryland. That's a panel survey, which has been ongoing since 2004-05. And there was a follow-up survey in 2011-12. And yet again, a follow-up survey now in 22-23. I think it's a fairly decent survey and has been used quite extensively. At the same time, I do think that unless the NSS undertakes a survey, which will have a lot more legitimacy and popularity and use, we have to stay with the NSS survey, with the NCAR survey. At the same time, we do have considerable data on consumption. And this is inequality in consumption is for which we have data from 1951 onwards. We were the pioneers in terms of household data when the NSSO started with the first survey in 1951. Now, that data is rigorous, has been presented several, there are various problems with it, which we can go into. But yes, on consumption inequality, as opposed to income inequality, we have not only for India, but for the rest of the world, many countries. On income inequality, also, there are many countries, especially in Latin America, in Europe, in the US, Western nations have a lot of income distribution data. East Asia has dominantly consumption data, not income distribution data, or not to the same extent or very partial. So that's the situation on data.
But as you just mentioned, that there is a lack of data, and we have to use proxy data like consumption expenditure data. So in that scenario, what is stopping the government to compile the data in the required format? Why it has not been done till yet?
It's a question I cannot answer. I have made the same request. And this is independent of the political regime. Remember when I was a member of the National Statistical Commission 2006 to 2009, with, from a position of reasonable influence, which is the commission headed by Tendulkar, who, as you know, was one of the prominent people on data. Quite honestly, it is something that I've not understood at all. And we can go into other even problems with the consumption data. But I honestly don't understand. The previous governments, remember this thing, we have been releasing household data on consumption as well as employment, unit level data, NSS data since 1983. It forms a basis for poverty analysis, which until recently was our number one concern. Even now it's a concern, but now the poverty level, in my view, is much, the income level or the consumption level at which a person is defined as poor is much higher in real terms than it ever was before. But so, I think media should take this up. I have taken it up. I can't tell you how many articles have been written that we need to have income distribution data by government. So in other words, government data has a certain checks and balances which the other data do not have. But your guess is as good as mine. I think maybe the government wants private sector data to flourish, so they don't present or don't do their own service. I don't know. Maybe this is where we want privatization, but I really think the government should be actively involved in collecting data on income distribution, as well as consumption, labor force, etc. Actually, let me make a broad point. I really believe that data is the new oil. It is very important to get data in order to make better policy, in order to make better policy. In the olden days, nobody knew what was going on. There wasn't any data. And we had, I think, on the whole, very bad economic policies. Now we don't have that excuse. So we have been getting good policies ever since 1991. And the good policy initiatives have really accelerated over the last 8-9 years. But at the same time, this item is lacking. Maybe I certainly am, pushing for more data to be made available and more data to be done by the government. But so you and I are on the same page.
As you said, in the past few years or maybe a decade, we are getting good policies, but I would like to say only data could be the right measures as of how effective these policies have been. Similarly, now Oxfam report came recently, which said that 5% of the richest Indian control over 62% of the wealth. Now, these kind of figures, they suggest that a lot of wealth has been concentrated in the hands of a few. How does this affect a common man?
Okay, now let's get to the Oxfam data. That's a private sector. It's not a government. And, I looked at the Oxfam data in one of my books, etc. There's so many billionaires, this, that. I don't think the Oxfam data or their conclusions are rigorous at all. So indeed, that is further reason why we should have an income distribution. survey. Indeed, if you look at the NCAR Human Development Survey, that shows considerably less inequality than what Oxfam comes up with. So I think this raises a larger issue, that governments around the world who do not publish their own data are keeping, that's what I said earlier, these private sector fantasies to flourish, ideology to flourish, for inaccuracies to flourish. But these are ideological inaccuracies. So one can only, as I said, for India as well as others, you can compare what Oxfam comes up with all the available data. And I think one point on this, one should not ignore consumption inequality, for which we do have a lot of data. And it turns out, and we know that the 2017-18 National Sample Survey was not published by the government. I think we need a forensic analysis of that data, some of which myself and my colleagues, Ivan Vermani and Karan Bhasin, tried to do in the IMF working paper. That I think the results of that survey showed something deeply wrong with their findings and their conclusions. One conclusion was that poverty had substantially gone up between 2011-12 and 2017-18, and there is no data that I've been able to find, that others have been able to find, which corroborates, no private sector data, which corroborates the finding of the non-release survey. But I think we need to go into depth of that survey. I think the results of that survey itself should be released. I had written sometime in 2019 or 2020 that we must release the data in order that the world find out how bad it is, the quality of the data. Now, I think the reason I'm emphasizing and I'll give you one reason why I think it wasn't released. And I've changed my view from saying you must release it to that there are good reasons not to release it. And the good reason not to release it, which gets to the larger point that we are discussing, is that if it had been released, then everybody in the world will cite this data, completely, in my view, inaccurate data, but nevertheless, and perhaps ideologically driven data, but nevertheless, the international authorities can't do anything else but take the data that the government provides. One other suggestion to you in your shows, etc., is to look at the quality of the other countries' data on income. I think given that I believe in the data and the robustness of the data, quality should not be assumed. Just like on Oxfam that you cited, quality should not be assumed. It should go through a rigorous check and balance and let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 articles come out. That's when we'll know what is actually happening or not. So I'm not saying that the government data, once given, will be the truth. It may not be, but that's where journalists like yourself or academics like myself, we can look into the data and we can discuss. With Oxfam type data, we can't even discuss. The 2017-18 economic NSSO data on consumption was not released on grounds of bad quality. And to call that, my understanding of that data, and some of it has been leaked in Business Standard and other papers, the Hindu, I believe. So looking at that data, I mean, I think it was terrible quality data. That's not to say that the earlier data were of perfect quality. No, but the earlier data were of acceptable quality in which one can probe and find out what is going on. With this data, it didn't match. For example, the 2017-18 data didn't match with any other data, including survey data that was available at that time. So you have, how much wheat is being produced. I don't think there's too many inaccuracies in how much wheat and rice is being produced. You have data on how many flights are being taken. So there's a lot of, there's a whole market out there where people are looking at these various data, making bets about it. So some of it should match what this survey had. So I'm not saying that if it's a government survey, it automatically good. No, but it allows you to debate, discuss, and infer in a manner that is not shrouded by ideology or inaccuracies of a larger nature. So there is a threshold. There's a certain amount of inaccuracy that is abundantly there in every survey in the world. But you want to do so. Let me give you on data. The CMIE has publishes income distribution, consumption distribution, female labor force participation rates. Their female labor force participation rate for India is something like 8%. Okay, 8%. Only 8% of women in the age group of 15 to 64 either want to work or are working. 8%. Now, we have surveys of every country in the world for the last at least 70 years. This low labor force participation rate has yet to be observed at any point in history for any country. Even Yemen has a female labor force participation rate of 10%. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to emphasize, that there are ways, forensic analysis, just like you have forensic analysis of stock market, etc. You can go deep down. And my plea to you guys, etc., your tribe, and I'm part of your tribe. Okay, I write articles in newspapers. I'm a quasi journalist. I'm a wannabe journalist. But we don't question. We look at this data supports my ideology, and therefore I, promote it.
So, Gigi, my last question to you would be, what changes do you think should be brought in to narrow this gap of income inequality that persists in our society?
There will never be a time, and never has been a time, when there hasn't been a gap in income, starting on Karl Marx. Okay? Now, let's talk about income inequality and the gap. It turns out, and this is in a paper, in a book, and several other papers, that income inequality in the world today is at its lowest level ever. Okay? Where you take the world is one country, 7.5 billion individuals, and what is the per capita income of these people, income as well as consumption? It's at the lowest level ever. Now, I think it'll go lower still. Okay? But how often have you seen that statistic no, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and we go with that nonsense all the time. Second, on consumption inequality in India, it turns out that every study based on broadly bad data, okay, which I've said, but every study based on non-government data has shown that consumption inequality in India has improved over the last 12 years, since 2011, 10 years. Every study using, I think, bad data. But, if you're looking for, just like you cited Oxfam, okay, these are studies. You haven't cited these studies. I believe you shouldn't cite either Oxfam or this study. But to the extent you're going to cite Oxfam, and you should cite these studies, which show that inequality in India has declined, consumption inequality, okay? So, and as I said, on income inequality in the world, etc., this was studied, it's called The New Wealth of Nations, published in 2018, which looked at income inequality, education inequality, various parameters since 1950 in the world, and income inequality since 1870. So, I'd like to see the evidence.
Gigi, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.